American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. After a second assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, President Biden and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer want to boost the Secret Service's budget, though some GOP lawmakers, like Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, say they don't think money is the problem.
These were errors of willpower, not manpower. Now, like Washington, everything else, somebody fails at their job, you give them more money. No, why don't we replace the people who didn't do their job and have better people in those positions?
The president weighs in on a potential port strike.
With a possible port strike looming, a group of nearly 200 trade associations is calling on the White House to help reach a resolution. But the administration says President Biden does not intend to invoke a federal law to prevent the strike, which could shut down half of America's shipping cargo. The White House encouraging all parties to remain at the bargaining table, saying we've never invoked Taft-Hartley to break a strike and are not considering doing it now. Initial demands from the International Longshoremen's Union include a 77% pay increase over 6 years and a total ban on automating some of their job functions. Lillian Wu, Fox News.
The FBI says it shut down a China-backed hacking group called Volt Typhoon. FBI Director Christopher Wray providing more details.
Volt Typhoon is just one facet of a broader campaign by the Chinese government to infiltrate U.S. infrastructure, co-opt devices in your organizations, and frankly a whole lot of homes, and use them to target us and our allies.
The election is in 48 days. Kamala Harris sat down with 3 reporters who are members of the National Association of Black Journalists yesterday. Donald Trump spoke with the organization in July, but the treatment that both candidates received was very different.
You have told 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens to go back to where they came from. You've attacked black journalists, calling them a loser, saying the questions that they ask are, quote, stupid and racist. Why should black voters trust you after you have used language like that?
And for you to start off a question and answer period, especially when you're 35 minutes late because you couldn't get your equipment to work in such a hostile manner, I think it's a disgrace.
Your opponent and Republicans have at times weaponized you laughing. Why is joy important to you to insert into this election?
There are some times when your adversaries will try and turn your strength into a weakness. Don't you let them.
Texas Congressman Tony Gonzalez says this is why so many people love Donald Trump.
He is not afraid to go into tough environments and honestly deliver the truth, a truthful message, and push back against some of these narratives that some of these outlets try to create. And I also think it enrages people. It gets people excited, or it gets them upset and gets them off the couch, which is exactly what we need in order to win this election. Not only the president, we have to take the Senate, we have to take the House, we have to take our country back.
Chinese-American pastor David Lin is back in the U.S. after nearly 2 decades in a Chinese prison. And while that's something to celebrate, other pastors and Christians remain in custody or face jail time.
Bob Fu, founder and president of China Aid, says there are a lot of pastors that have been sentenced or are about to be tried in the coming weeks. The reason? They put out a box in the church for tithes and offerings.
They were charged with the same criminal charge like Pastor David. It's a business fraud. So now tithing and offering in the Communist Party's China is regarded as a criminal act. So we should certainly pray.
Fu calls it our most powerful weapon in spiritual warfare, but he says prayer is not the only option. Fu recommends people write letters to the persecuted and fund efforts to help them and their families.
We should also speak up. I think especially now in the presidential election season, China is pretty much on the news, and we should press all our elected officials, from presidential candidates to congressional candidates, or local mayors even, those who especially have a sister city or relationship with China, we should hold them accountable.
Chris Woodward.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
Streaming.afa.net has now become AFA Stream, and you can find it at stream.afa.net. You see, we removed the letters ing. Our experts have determined that eliminating those 3 keystrokes, multiplied over hundreds of thousands of AFA Stream visits, could reduce the national debt and maybe increase the gross domestic product. AFA Stream, formerly streaming.afa.net. Improvements to the economy are purely theoretical. Welcome to Today's Issues. Join us for the next hour as we offer a Christian response to the issues of the day. Here's your host, Ed Vitagliano.
And welcome, everybody, to Today's Issues. Ed Vitagliano sitting in for Tim Wildman this week. I am joined in studio by Fred Jackson. Good morning, Fred.
Hello, Ed.
And remotely, Dr. Alex McFarland. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, gentlemen.
And then for the second time in 3 days, we have gone to the bottom of the barrel.
That's right.
And brought in Tony Vitagliano, one of our vice presidents, and my son. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good to be here.
And we have a bunch of folks out. I'm just teasing Tony. I told him in advance I was going to be saying that. It's kind of like hazing.
Right.
It's like hazing. You know, you're new to the outfit, and we're gonna punish you a little bit, and make you pick up dry cleaning, get coffee. In my case, get a Diet Coke.
What's the reason for it when I'm not on the show? What's that called?
Yes, that's
Touche.
Yes, touche. He's got his mother's quick wit when it comes to humiliating me in public, but that's okay. So, anyway, welcome. Glad to have you on board some this week. Fred, we've talked before. I've talked with Tim Wildman, and we've said it on air, can't wait for the election to be over because of the crush of information that we have to deal with. But even apart from the election, there is stuff going on in the Middle East. This is just mind-boggling, and it's constantly changing, new stuff happening. What is the latest going on?
24 hours ago, when we opened our program yesterday, we had breaking news of pagers exploding, pagers being used by Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. And we now know at least 12 people were killed by these exploding pagers and literally thousands of others injured. And the backstory very quickly was that Hezbollah terrorists had told its people to stop using cell phones because they were worried Israel could then track where these Hezbollah terrorists were. Hezbollah, Lebanon, just on the northern border of Israel.
Right.
And, the terrorists have been throwing missiles into Israel ever since the day after the October 7th Hamas attack against Israel in southern Israel. So yesterday, the story was the exploding pagers. Now, there's been, some stories in the last 24 hours. How did this happen? The belief is that Israel had managed to find a way that when a certain signal was sent to these pagers, the lithium batteries that run these things heated up and exploded. That's what we know so far. Now, we're just learning in the last 5-10 minutes, there have been further explosions this morning, possibly of walkie-talkies that these Hezbollah terrorists may be using. And there's one report saying at least 3 or 4 walkie-talkies exploding. So that is the latest. Funerals are being held today for some of those people who were killed yesterday. Of course, the usual condemnation of Israel. But Israel is at war with 2 terrorist groups.
Right.
Hamas terrorists who run Gaza and the Hezbollah terrorist group, all backed by Iran, both backed by Iran. So this isn't just Israel being nasty. This is Israel trying to protect itself, because what happened the day after the Hamas massacre in southern Israel, Hezbollah began to fire on northern Israel, forcing people who live in northern Israel to move out of there. And they haven't been able to go back.
That's right.
And it's almost a year since that October 7th massacre. So earlier this week, Prime Minister Netanyahu had said, we are ready to open up a full-fledged attack against Hezbollah because we want to secure northern Israel so our people can move back there. So this is believed to be a new technique on this, and you can only imagine the intimidation factor that this would provide against these Hezbollah terrorists, that Israel can find you and do things to you to protect themselves?
You know, Alex, first it was the pagers. Well, first it was the cell phones where Hezbollah, was concerned that Israel would be able to track them and I'm guess take them out. So they went to the pagers. Those started exploding. Last I heard, Fred, there were more than 3,000 injured. That number probably is going to continue to climb. Now walkie-talkies, and when I heard that this morning, I was thinking, what else can go off? If you're Hezbollah, and by the way, I'm sure these pagers, there are thousands of Hezbollah soldiers. These individuals who got the pagers have to be in the upper echelon of Hezbollah leadership. Yeah. But if you're a part of that terrorist organization, you're wondering if your oatmeal's going to go off because Israel has found yet another way to target those who are trying to destroy their country.
Yeah, I mean, if I were over there, I would be going back to carrier pigeons or maybe a tin can on a string, But I said yesterday that, Haman was executed on the gallows he built for Mordecai and the Jews. And, the Bible says in Genesis chapter 12, God promised Abraham, I will bless them that bless thee and curse them that curse thee. Mark Twain, who was not, as far as we know, he never became a Christian believer, but Mark Twain said, if there's anything that makes me believe in God and the supernatural, it's the Jewish people. And God is going to protect Israel, ultimately. And that's why I've said many times the best favor an American president could ever do this nation is to be a friend to Israel. People square off against the nation of Israel at their own peril.
Tony, there has been talk, and the expectation is that Israel is at some point going into Lebanon because of what, Fred, you were talking about. For over a year, Hezbollah has been attacking the country, the northern part of Israel, trying to kill its citizens. So I have to wonder, because none of us know, I mean, even probably foreign policy experts don't know exactly what Israel intends to do or what Hezbollah is thinking, but I have to believe that they are unnerved at this point, and if Israel does decide to invade the southern part of Lebanon to go after Hezbollah, I wonder what the psychological impact of this initial response, the pagers and now the walkie-talkies, is going to have on Hezbollah.
Yeah, absolutely. We can kind of look at it for a parallel, because there is a lot of speculation as to whether the war plans have been approved. There's some outlets have reported the war plans have been approved for an invasion of Lebanon, and the purpose of invading southern Lebanon would be, according to Israel, their goal would be to secure the northern part of Israel so that those who have had to flee because of the constant attacks from Hezbollah could go back to where they live. So the goal would be to invade southern Lebanon, push back Hezbollah, and kind of create a buffer. But for this pager attack is an analogy I can think of is it would be like the Allies causing all of the Nazis' radios to explode a couple of days before the invasion of Normandy.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's kind of it's a tactic that's going to cause a lot of disruption, especially like you said, where you can assume these pagers were given to officers, leaders within the ranks, other probably Iranian parallel units who were aiding them. So this was targeted towards disrupting the command structure, is what it looks like to me, disrupting the command structure of Hezbollah with the imminent probable invasion of southern Lebanon. So
and communication.
And communication.
Because if you can't use cell phones and you can't use pagers, and apparently you can't use walkie-talkies, you're going to use homing pigeons. How do you communicate in the midst of a war if that comes between Israel and Hezbollah?
Like I said, the intimidation factor itself at this point. Now, Hezbollah has already obviously said that they are going to respond, and that's the usual kind of response we get in these cases. But they have to be worried right now. I'm just seeing a CNN report where there have been, I was saying a few moments ago, 30 to 40 explosions now in the last few hours, with at least 3 people killed with these now exploding walkie-talkies. Mm-hmm. But it just goes to the brilliance of the Israeli military.
Yes.
And how they're able to carry out, whether it was the raid on Entebbe,
right?
That goes back many years, I know, but the reports that we've heard of the attacks against Israel since Israel reformed as a nation in 1948, and things that happened when Israel was vastly outnumbered.
Right.
And yet they defeated the enemies. 5 Arab nations coming against Israel.
Right.
When Israel basically had no way to protect itself.
In 1948, they had no army.
Nothing.
Didn't even have a lot of weapons.
Yes. I think they had some Czechoslovakian old airplanes.
Right.
That's about all they had. But this just goes. God's protective hand is upon that nation. And he has given them a military capability that I don't think any nation surpasses.
Yeah.
I think it shows that their rules of engagement also are vastly different from the rest of the world. Yes. They realize the enemy that they're up against, and it's a shame that we have this flip-flopping on support for Israel from the current administration, because it's obvious that the current administration doesn't view the enemies that Israel is dealing with in the same light that they should, right? They should, and that's why we should continue to support them rather than threatening them with withholding munitions, for how they're handling the situation in Gaza.
Right. All right. What's any additional information on that, or you want to move on, or what?
We can move on.
Okay. What else we got?
Because we have a political campaign going on in this country.
Yes.
And in the wake of the second assassination attempt on former President Trump on Sunday, a lot of questions have been pointed at the threatening language being used by Democrats, up to and including Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden. And many people on the conservative side saying, look, you keep saying that Donald Trump is a threat to the country. Don't you think that certain people who may listen to that are hearing that he really is a threat to the future of this country and that he must be eliminated? I mean, Hillary Clinton was going at it again in the last 48 hours, that Donald Trump has to be removed from power, et cetera, et cetera. Well, yesterday, the one brave reporter that we often see at the White House briefing, that being Peter Doocy, decided to challenge Karine Jean-Pierre, the official spokesperson for the White House, on this issue of language and using the term of Donald Trump being a threat to the nation. And the exchange got rather heated. I'm going to play that for you. Cut number 1.
How many more assassination attempts on Donald Trump until the president and the vice president and you pick a different word to describe Trump other than threat?
Peter, if anything from this administration, I actually completely disagree with the premise of your question, the question that you're asking. It is also incredibly dangerous in the way that you're asking it, because American people are watching.
That's I love it. I got to tell you, there are people who have nerve, and then there are people who have nerve.
Uh-huh.
And Alex, I got to tell you that was a nervy thing to say. It's a legitimate question what Peter Doocy was asking, especially since people on the left, including the Biden administration, Kamala Harris and Karine Jean-Pierre, have blamed Trump, of all people, and made him the cause of the assassination attempts toward him. And then she turns around and says just asking the question is dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a classic example of blame the victim. And let me just say, if you read like Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, which Obama loved that, I mean, the degree to which Marxist overthrow of a culture has become the Democrat playbook, I mean, that's something worth talking about over the last, 10 to 15 years. But here's the thing, blame the victim. This honest question, hey, you guys continually demonize and just denigrate Donald Trump. Is this not maybe motivating some unhinged people to engage in violence against the former president? And she says, you're a part of the threat for even asking that question. I mean, silence your opponents. Now here's the thing. I mentioned this yesterday, guys. This just very lofty term, existential threat.
Right.
So in April of this year, ScienceNews.com listed like a list of the things that could end the human race: nuclear war, the right pandemic, lack of water,
an asteroid hitting.
An asteroid, there are a dozen things that could potentially end human life. All right, Stanford University defined what existential threat means, because it's attributed to Donald Trump on a daily basis by the left. Stanford University just recently said, well, an existential threat is something that could end human civilization. Just think, Trump is more dangerous than a pandemic, an alien invasion, an asteroid, a global drought, just if he's elected, according to the left, we're talking about the loss of human civilization. I mean, this is ludicrous. This is ludicrous. Hopefully the American people are rational enough and mature enough to not buy any of their narrative.
I will say that according to a CBS reporter, I haven't had a chance to do a deep dive on this particular story. This says CBS reporter finds only 3 Harris supporters in 3 Nevada restaurants. People are really excited about Trump. And so I'm not making anything out of that in terms of predicting, but there does seem to be a lot of people who support Trump, and maybe part of that support comes from the overheated language of the left. Tony, one of the things, there are several things that are ironic here about what Karine Jean-Pierre did to Peter Doocy, but the left has been known for decades for blaming language for violence. Okay?
Yes.
Every time a homosexual gets, beat up in an alleyway, or a kid commits suicide. By the way, that's a tragedy. We certainly think it's terrible if people are being beat up for any reason. But the first reaction of the left has been, you're saying it's a sin. Your language is driving people to do X, Y, or Z. Now, I've always thought if somebody beats someone up, okay, that's on them. They're responsible for their actions. Don't come blaming a speech that someone made or a sermon that some pastor preached and blame them for what some psycho did. But now when you come to a situation like this where you're asking Karine Jean-Pierre, hey, you're the ones always blaming language and saying verbal violence, and it results in crime being committed. Should you guys maybe think about ratcheting down your rhetoric? Karine Jean-Pierre doesn't even seem to get the connection between what they're always preaching and what she was just asked.
I think what we're witnessing getting closer to this election is the full manifestation of just how broken the brains of the left are by Donald Trump. The ability to reason, the ability for introspection and self-reflection is gone, because all we hear over and over again is that we must stop Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the existential threat to our democracy, even as they continue to advocate for policies and laws that would openly and actually repress our democracy. I think about Hillary Clinton talking about we should jail people who propagate Russian disinformation. Well, who's going to determine Russian disinformation? Well, it's going to be people on the left.
Yeah.
Saul Alinsky has a famous quote, accuse your opponent of what you are doing.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
this is what they always turn to. And that I was reading through that exchange between Peter Doocy and KJP. Where does she go back to? January 6th, of course.
Yeah.
This is the example, the only thing they can keep pointing to over and over again of how Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy. All the while,
when they are the existential threat to our
Exactly.
constitutional republic.
Right.
Exactly.
Listen, I have no problem saying not everyone who's liberal. I'm saying this radical left that has taken over the Democratic Party, I can say without reservation they hate the Constitution.
Yeah.
Okay, and the reason I say that is because the Constitution separates powers. It decentralizes political power. The left wants to aggregate it and centralize it. That's their whole goal, is to control the country from Washington, D.C. Kamala Harris wants to have price controls. They want to tell public schools all across the country who they can let into bathrooms and changing areas.
Mm-hmm.
This is the quote unquote progressive but increasingly Marxist mindset, which is a state that is all powerful and will even tell states what to do. And and that is the antithesis of the Constitution.
And Ed, forgive me for jumping in here, but I don't know if you guys remember back when Hillary was running against Donald Trump in 2016, she spoke of federalizing law enforcement.
Yes.
You know, I mean, this goes so far beyond the enumerated powers of the Constitution, which, you know, like we said yesterday, the Constitution is really a fairly short read.
Right.
And the enumerated powers are very limited. One of the hallmarks of conservatism has been limited government. But this idea, you know, Tim Walz said that misinformation is not protected free speech.
Right.
And Hillary, and she's not the only lefty that talked about federalizing law enforcement. Ed, you nailed it. I mean, they want to run our lives from Washington, D.C., and we be a police state.
Yes. I listen, I have, again, the legitimate old school liberals like RFK Jr. and others, I would say Joe Manchin, I would say Tulsi Gabbard, these people that are
Joe Lieberman.
Joe Lieberman that are departing, Alan Dershowitz, Bill Maher, although he's still a Democrat, he has been critical of this kind of new wave of radical leftists. All these people, they had a legitimate place in public political discourse because they supported the Constitution. They understood. We were all in agreement with this document. I am increasingly convinced that this radical left wants to overthrow it. They may not say it in so many words, but their actions are proof enough for me. We'll be back in a minute, folks.
It's my turn.
Here is your host for My Turn, Don Wildman.
Jim had two things going against him. First, he was a habitual complainer. Now, I know you've met people like that. They're constantly complaining about something. If the sun is shining, they complain because there isn't any rain. If it's raining, they complain because the sun isn't shining. They would be absolutely miserable if they didn't have something to complain about. But since they do, they only make those around them miserable. Why people have that attitude is beyond me. Sure, there's plenty wrong. You don't have to be awake very long in the morning to realize that. But there's also plenty right. And it's up to us to choose which we will concentrate on. That which is wrong or that which is right. Now, I said Jim had two things going against him. The other was that he was stingy. He wanted to keep every penny he ever had, and he was constantly complaining about having to spend any of his money. I bet you've met people like that. Stingy, I mean. Of course, now, I know none of us are stingy, but we know other people who are. You and I have a healthy attitude toward money. We spend it for the necessities and for recreation, and we even give 1/10 of our money to the church. Well, maybe not 1/10, but at least it's a lot more than other people give. But back to Jim. One day Jim was talking with his neighbor and a friend of the neighbor. The subject turned to money, and Jim grabbed the chance to start complaining about how much his son was costing him. That boy didn't have any business going to college in the first place. College costs too much money. It ain't worth it. I never went to college, and it never hurt me. Well, the neighbor asked Jim about the boy getting a scholarship or his working to help some with the expenses. Well, he has a scholarship which pays for most of his tuition, and he works about 20 hours a week, but it still costs me a lot of money, Jim said. Up to that point in the conversation, the friend of Jim's neighbor had not said hardly anything. But there was a slack in the conversation, and the friend spoke up. I know how you feel, Jim. I had a boy in college a few years back. Seemed like it took everything I could beg and borrow to keep him in school. Every time I turned around, it was $10 for this and $50 for something else. And I guess I did my share of complaining about how much it was costing me. There was a pause in his conversation, but then the friend continued. But you know something, Jim? The neighbor's friend asked. What's that? Replied Jim. My boy doesn't cost me a penny now, the friend said. Well, I'll be glad when my boy doesn't cost me any more money, said Jim. The friend waited for a moment, then he ended the conversation. No, Jim, that boy of mine doesn't cost me a penny now. He'll never cost me another penny as long as I live. He was killed in an automobile accident 3 years ago. Think about it for a moment, my friend.
This has been My Turn with Don Wildman, a production of the American Family Association.
The Lord looks down from heaven on all mankind to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. Psalm 14, verse 2.
American Family Radio. This is today's issues. Email your comments to comments@afr.net. Past broadcasts of today's issues are available for listening and viewing in the archive at afr.net. Now, back to more of today's issues.
And welcome back. Ed Vitagliano sitting in for Tim Wildman today. I'm joined in studio by Fred Jackson. Dr. Alex McFarland also joins us, and in studio, Tony Vitagliano, one of our vice presidents. And now the always effervescent Jenna Ellis, host of Jenna Ellis in the Morning. Heard weekdays at 7 a.m. Central Time here on AFR. Jenna, good morning to you.
Good morning, and I'm going to add that now to my resume. I'm an expert in effervescence.
Yes.
Apparently.
Listen,
yes.
Nothing better than being effervescent. I'm not quite sure I know what that means. I probably should have figured that out before I said
It's
that.
okay.
But
Kamala Harris doesn't either, so we're fine.
Oh, so you just went there. You just compared me to Kamala Harris. That ruined my day.
I'm sorry. That was that was worse than the boomer jokes that I tell Tim. So.
Oh yeah, that's yeah. Okay, boomer. Boy, I can't hear that enough. All right. Well, Jenna, we have been discussing, and we want to get your take on this. Some of the fallout from 2 assassination attempts on President Trump, which I can't believe we're talking about 2 assassination attempts. But some of the fallout has been a discussion about who's to blame for that. The left, of course, continues to blame Trump for the assassination attempts. Some on the right, and I hope, even-handed people in the middle are, questioning if maybe Democratic Party rhetoric hasn't led to that. Fred, why don't you kind of set up and play for Jenna in case she was not listening before the break, what we were discussing in terms of Peter Doocy and Karine Jean-Pierre.
Yeah, Jenna, was the White House briefing yesterday, and once again, Peter Doocy rises to the occasion. Peter Doocy was talking about the use of the word threat, referring to Donald Trump being a threat to the democracy of the country, et cetera, et cetera. So Peter Doocy says, Kamala Harris, President Joe Biden, and he says, even you, Karine Jean-Pierre, use the word threat. So here's that exchange, Peter Doocy's question and KJP's response.
How many more assassination attempts on Donald Trump until the president and the vice president and you pick a different word to describe Trump other than threat?
Peter, if anything from this administration, I actually completely disagree with the premise of your question, the question that you're asking. It is also incredibly dangerous in the way that you're asking it because American people are watching.
All right, Jenna. So who's right, KJP or Peter Doocy?
Well, clearly, Peter Doocy asked a great question, and if anyone knows how to be more vague than Kamala Harris, it's Karine Jean-Pierre. She never actually responds to a question, but it's a legitimate question because generally threats should be neutralized. I mean, when I have a threat of a spider in my apartment, I kill it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a normal thing. And so the whole both sidesing the rhetoric here of saying, well, both sides need to tone it down, and I've seen over the mainstream media saying, well, it's Trump's rhetoric that's getting himself in trouble. I mean, they're almost trying to blame him for the assassination attempts, which is utterly ridiculous. But the left is trying to equivocate Trump's rhetoric calling Kamala Harris a communist to hers calling him a threat to democracy. And the difference here is that he can actually back up the claim that she's a communist. Her policies reflect that, but she can't back up the claim that the left is literally calling him Hitler. And so I think for us as conservatives, we need to say, of course, we need to be careful that it's not just this entertainment-based sort of inflammatory rhetoric. We're not just out here to name call or pejoratives, but when we call Kamala Harris a communist, we actually substantively mean something by that, and so does Donald Trump. But for Kamala Harris and the left to continue to call him a threat, I think is very dangerous. And I think this is a really scary situation where we have about 50 days before the November election. And I don't think we've seen the last attempt on his life, sadly, because this is how far the left is going. They've continued to try to just get Trump. That's been their mantra since 2015. They've tried all kinds of ways, including personal attacks, financial bankruptcy, lawfare, the Mueller investigation, impeachments over and over. And now the only way literally to silence him is to try to take him out. And I have not seen from the left a complete condemnation of these assassination attempts in ways that would make me feel safe if I'm Donald Trump.
Well, let me add some numbers to this, and then Alex and Tony, you guys jump in here, and whatever you want to ask of Jenna, please do so. But I noted a story yesterday. I'm not sure when this happened on The View, you know, that wonderful show, daytime show. It actually gets pretty good numbers in terms of viewership. But co-host Sunny Hostin was responding to a poll that was released in July. So this is a little bit behind the curve somewhat. But this is a poll that the results were released University of Chicago via the Chicago Project on Security and Threats. And this survey, this poll, found that 10% of Americans support violence against Donald Trump. And now, Sunny Hostin, to her credit, she said this was despicable, that there should be no support for violence against Trump. But I was stunned by the release of even 10%. I know that's just 1/10, but the numbers were 26 million. 26 million people, I think, was the actual number. It was 26 million Americans believe the use of force is justified to keep Trump from regaining the presidency. Now, that's, to me, is stunning that you have that number of people, not who think in general terms, yeah, I think political violence is sometimes justified. No, they said violence was justified against Donald Trump. And I want your take on that, but also that would indicate that something the left is doing is driving people to that conclusion.
Of course, and this is the outcome of their worldview. I mean, they're already the party that doesn't believe in the inherent dignity and value of human life, and they are the ones that target their political adversaries, and they're the ones that tell all of their followers that human life doesn't matter and that you can persecute your political opponents. And so taking those two things together, it's the logical outcome that people would get from their rhetoric, then, okay, we're going to not value human life and take out our political opponents. I mean, this is the logical conclusion of what they're driving at. And this, it's so ironic that when Kamala Harris and the Democrats say that Trump is a threat to democracy, she's the one who didn't get a single vote or any sort of democratic process in her nomination. And, this is also coming from the party that is trying to be in power in any way possible, where it's actually the conservatives and it's the Trump supporters that say we want to make sure that there are no non-American citizens or illegal aliens that are voting in our elections. And it's the Democrats that oppose the SAVE Act that's being voted on today in Congress. And it's the conservatives and the Trump supporters that say, okay, we want to make sure that we beat her at the ballot box, not any other way. I mean, and so we're actually the ones that want to protect and preserve the process in this country and have it legitimate, where the Democrats will use lawfare, they'll manipulate the Constitution and the system any way possible. So is it really that big of a surprise when some of these people are taking it just to the next level to try to continue to keep the Democrats in power? I mean, I don't think that this is a bridge that is inconsistent in their worldview for their followers to make, and that is a very dangerous conclusion.
Alex?
Jenna, hi. Alex McFarland here. It's a great honor to speak with you.
You too.
Could it not be argued legitimately that all of this rhetoric against Donald Trump and, repeatedly calling him a threat, an existential threat, those that have engaged in such rhetoric and then unhinged people like Ryan Wesley Ruth and Matthew Crooks act on it, could it not be legitimately argued, Jenna, that this amounts to they are complicit and this is reckless endangerment by this language against him?
Well, I think in our sort of colloquial speak, yes. From a legal perspective, I don't yet at least see anything that would directly tie them to being personally responsible. I mean, you have to go back and see, what Trump was impeached and then acquitted for in the second impeachment was this sort of incitement of violence, where clearly the left was trying to tie him to other people's actions, and some of those actions were criminal on January 6th of 2021. And so I think we need to be careful to go that direction legally, because unless there is a direct incitement, and the law has a very clear definition of that, then we do allow for freedom of speech in this country. But in terms of recklessness in the political sphere and just wanting to ensure that there is never any sort of incitement, I do think the left needs to be careful. And so while we can term it that, I think just in a political sense, probably not yet in a legal sense. I haven't seen anything that I would say, okay, somebody like Kamala Harris or a Democrat politician should be in trouble legally for their rhetoric, at least not yet. And hopefully we don't get to that point.
By the way, folks, Brent Creeley, our producer, is going to post. It is posted. He has posted the link to the article I mentioned that talks about 10% of people surveyed approve of violence specifically against Donald Trump. That's from a Fox News story. You can go scroll down and click on the actual link to the study itself if you want more of that information. Jenna, what do you got cooking for the rest of the week in terms of guests? If you've got that far and want to kind of tease what's coming up, what you got?
Well, the great Alex McFarland will be sitting in for me tomorrow morning, which will be great. So, so you can ask him on that. And then Friday, we have an entire show on the definition of Marxism and how Kamala Harris's policies actually are Marxist. So this is going to be a 1-hour deep dive. So many people on social media suggest that, we're just using that term as a pejorative and as something, that we can't really define. So we're going to take the entire hour and say, well, actually, we can define that and contrast that with the biblical worldview, the constitutional perspective, and really do a deep dive on Friday on that.
All right. Now, is that going to be, are you going to have guests on to discuss that, or you're perfectly capable of doing it yourself? But
a conversation's always better. And so, yes, Daryl Harrison, who is a very dear friend, and he is a pastor at Redeemer Bible Church in Gilbert, Arizona. That's what it is.
Okay.
He's a great biblical counselor, and also the co-host of the Just Thinking podcast. Really excellent. They do deep dives on critical race theory, all kinds of stuff. He's going to be joining me for the hour.
Well, I will say this before we let you go. It is exciting to know that a pastor is capable of discussing an issue like this, because far too many pastors, I think, try to stay away from politics and understanding our Constitution and understanding the competing worldviews that are at war with the Constitution and the constitutional view. So it's exciting to know that there are pastors out there who can talk intelligently about this subject, and you're going to have one on your program on Friday. So
so true. So true.
Yes,
More pastors need to
in-
be doing that, by the way. So sorry, Alex, go ahead.
When I have the privilege of guest hosting the Jenna Ellis show tomorrow, for one thing, I'm going to talk about Saul Bloom, who was the Democrat senator from New York State that wrote in 1925 the history of the U.S. Constitution, which Antonin Scalia called a classic in constitutional studies. So we're going to talk about the Constitution, but also tomorrow live I'll have an interview with Sheriff Richard Jones from Butler County, Ohio, and we'll get some firsthand on-the-ground report about the immigrants in Ohio.
Wow. All right. So are we going to get a final answer on the cats and the dogs, or I'm just kidding? I don't even want to go there, but
maybe. but it's going to be a great show tomorrow, and I'm very honored to sit in.
I'm going to say both those shows sound fantastic. Alex and then Jenna. Of course, Alex will be hosting Jenna's show, so she gets partial credit for that tomorrow. And then Jenna's show on Friday morning sounds fantastic. Jenna, thank you so much for being on with us today. And look, thank you for all you do to defend the Constitution and a biblical worldview. We appreciate you being on AFR and all the other stuff you do beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just love the AFR family, and thanks so much to Alex, who's always just fantastic sitting in, and I look forward to listening to it tomorrow morning. So thanks, guys, so much.
All right. Thanks, Jenna. All right, Fred, where to next?
Well, let's keep with the topic of language. Remember back a few months ago, Donald Trump started talking about an economic bloodbath?
Yes.
For the automotive industry should President Biden win. All right. And what he's referring to there is that President Biden is going to put the auto workers out of business.
Right.
Because he wants everybody driving electric vehicles. So the context was that term bloodbath, an economic bloodbath. Well, what have the Democrats and their friends done even in the media? They've turned that into, oh, he's going to go out and start killing
people in the streets.
Going to kill people in the streets.
Exploding their pagers.
Well, in the last few days, since Sunday's second attempt at assassinating former President Trump, CNN had a roundtable to discuss just what we've been discussing here, the language being used by the left to misrepresent former President Trump's point of view and insinuating like, he's a threat to democracy. Now they're saying the bloodbath term refers to actually hurting people if he gets elected. I mean, physically hurting people. So I want you to listen to this exchange. Scott Jennings, who is sitting on this panel, is CNN's senior political commentator. He is taking his own network and those people who work for that network to task for misrepresenting. And it happened during the debate, too.
Yes.
Totally. And, of course, the ABC moderators, did they call Kamala Harris on the mat for that? Of course not.
No.
So have a listen to this exchange in this CNN roundtable about the misuse and abuse of language and taking language out of context. Cut number 14.
It is said by every Democrat working for or around her campaign every day on this network and every other one. The bloodbath thing is stated every single day.
Okay, let me
But
just,
my
just
point
to clear,
is,
just to clear
dictator,
this up.
bloodbath, eliminate Constitution.
Hold on.
What do you
Let's
think that
just
does
to clear
to
this up. You're referring to Trump's use of the word bloodbath when he was talking.
And what was he talking about?
He was. I'm going to explain it to people because I think there's confusion about this. Use of the word bloodbath when he was talking about, vehicle manufacturing jobs in the United States. Vice President Harris improperly and unfairly mischaracterized that as him saying there would be a bloodbath if he were elected. However, she did not say that if Trump were elected, there would be a bloodbath. She did not say that.
I know you have interviewed and had people out here and have watched the same coverage I have. The bloodbath garbage is it is a pillar of the Democratic campaign against Trump, as is dictator, as is eliminate the U.S. Constitution.
You know, Tony, that explanation of what Kamala Harris said and the defense of what Democrats have been saying, this wasn't a mistake.
Oh.
This is not a mistake. Just like the Charlottesville garbage is not a mistake. They are knowingly lying because they are continuing to demonize Donald Trump. And the word bloodbath, if you don't understand the context, sounds like a threat of violence against people with whom the former president disagrees. Kamala Harris wasn't a mistake. I don't think it was a mistake that the ABC moderators didn't correct her on that. This is part of the playbook.
No, I just want to say good for Scott Jennings on holding these people's feet to the fire and making them give an account for what they've been saying. It's folks, these people talk on both sides of their mouth, both sides of their mouth. They want to misrepresent. They're always mischaracterizing and misrepresenting and lying about the context and the words and the verbiage that Donald Trump is using, while at the same time explicitly saying what they're going to do, which is far more dangerous, and saying that that's not what they said. So you have a complete reversal and just memory holing of everything that Kamala Harris has said prior to being made the nominee for the Democratic Party. You've had just a complete memory holing of everything she actually said, while at the same time, as an example of the ABC debate, misrepresenting everything that Donald Trump says. So Kamala Harris didn't say she wanted to ban fracking. Well, she said it, but that's not what she meant, right? And so there's this. The media is more than happy to jump over themselves to, rephrase what Kamala Harris was saying. And I think what she was saying was, that she's kind of changed her opinion on fracking, or she's kind of softened up on the Second Amendment. She doesn't really want to just confiscate your guns, or, she doesn't really want price controls. They will fall over themselves to correct and pull back what the Democratic Party says, while simultaneously pushing the same narrative and the same lies over and over and over again that have been debunked and have been, since numerous times over, have been corrected. And good for Scott Jennings on calling them to the mat on that.
I'm actually surprised, Alex, that Scott Jennings is still at CNN.
Yeah.
The fact that he is funny a lot of times, I think, kind of helps him keep his seat. But Tony makes a good point. Kamala Harris has reversed and flipped on almost all her major positions.
Yeah.
That is being explained away, memory hold, putting a good spin on what she has clearly said. She said she was for mandatory gun buybacks. All right. Yeah. So Tim Walz said, as Fred mentioned earlier, that misinformation's not protected by the First Amendment. What does that mean? Okay, we all know what that means. So on the one hand, the terrible things that Democrats have said have been spun in a positive way or completely denied or memory hold. Meanwhile, they are twisting what Donald Trump has said to put the worst possible spin on it.
It's been said that the future belongs to those who communicate well. All right. let me say this. Doonesbury, I was no big fan of Doonesbury, Gary Trudeau, but when Clinton was in office, Gary Trudeau did a series of comics where there was a floating waffle that represented Bill Clinton. And they called him the Waffle in Chief. Do you guys remember that?
I still have a couple of Doonesbury books, and knowing that he was kind of leftist, but such a funny guy. So
such a funny guy. Now I'm showing my age here, but here's the thing: the left will twist, distort, spin language. The bloodbath thing, an economic bloodbath. Maybe that was a little bit over the top choice of word, but we know. Oh my goodness! Everybody knows he doesn't mean. If EVs are mandated, we should go out, killing, vandalizing. I mean, that would be BLM. But
right.
Here's the thing. In 1906, Ambrose Bierce wrote something called the Devil's Dictionary. And he would give the word like faith. Ambrose Bierce said faith is blindly believing something without evidence. Marriage, it's a slavery arrangement with a master and a mistress. I mean, and in a way it was viewed as satire, but whether it be the Screwtape Letters with C.S. Lewis in the 40s or the Devil's Dictionary with Ambrose Bierce, this, and I'm using my words carefully, this absolute bastardization of language, this absolute raping of the meaning of words, that is straight out of the left's playbook. Now, only in the mind of a leftist would killing a baby be health care.
Right, exactly. Good.
Right. And so, folks, I guess I'm saying you have to really use your imagination, but really be diligent and, frankly, prayerful to parse out what is being said by what is truly being meant.
And this is a biblical thing. I'm reading a lot in the prophets. I love the Old Testament prophets, and have been reading through some of them. And it's not like light reading, but they talk a lot about liars.
In Isaiah chapter 5, Isaiah says, "Woe to those who call good evil and evil good."
Yeah.
But that's the climate where we find ourselves, I believe.
And you know what? Christians ought to be willing to call out Republicans or conservatives if they lie. Okay, and so that part of that is it's an important part of the Christian responsibility to hold elected officials accountable. But I have to say, I think I'm being fair on this. The left has brought lying to a whole new level when it comes to the political discourse. So
yeah. Well, there was a book in the 90s called The Liar's Tale, A History of Falsehood by an author named Jeremy Campbell. And it was written during the Clinton years. And he said Bill Clinton has raised lying to an art form. Now, it's really important that we be persons of truth and we tell the truth. But look, we're sending people to Washington that call a spending increase a budget cut.
Yes. No, that's absolutely true, because
it's true, isn't it?
Republicans would say we want to lower the increase, so it's not going to be a 3% increase in spending; it's going to be a 2% increase or a 1.5% increase. And Democrats turn around and say it's a spending cut, and
let us not forget the Inflation Reduction Act.
That's a go-to.
Yes.
Even Joe Biden said the other day, that really wasn't the right name for that.
We should have named it what it was.
Look, I may or may not have been looking up Doonesbury floating Clinton waffle cartoon just to see what it was. I was absolutely rolling, having to mute my mic. That imagery. So
that is, Doonesbury was funny. The guy was clearly a leftist, but my goodness, a good comedian or a good cartoonist will skewer everyone who deserves skewering. So. All right, folks, we're going to take a 5-minute break for news, and when we come back, more here on today's issues. You're listening to the American Family Radio Network. We hope you'll join us.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
The climax of the book of Exodus, the Creator God came to dwell with his people. You can't approach the holiness of God however you want. Jesus understood this when he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Friends of Israel, bringing biblical truth about Israel and the Messiah. Saturdays, 2 p.m. Central on AFR. This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
Republican lawmakers calling for more information on the 2 assassination attempts on former President Donald Trump. House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik.
There must be a clear explanation of what happened this weekend in Florida, as well as answers for what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, and changes must be made to ensure this does not happen again.
FBI Director Christopher Wray weighing in on the second attempted assassination of former President Trump.
Our work is very much ongoing, and we're just a few days into the investigation, so we're limited in what we can say. At this point, what I can say is that we have dedicated the full force of the FBI to this investigation.
A Kentucky congressman is not dismissing the idea that there could be someone inside the Department of Homeland Security who is compromising President Donald Trump. Chad Groening has more.
A growing number of lawmakers in Congress fear there may be a mole inside DHS, and that mole is leaking security information about President Trump. Republican Thomas Massie of Kentucky is one of those lawmakers, and he says he doesn't have faith in these agencies anymore. During an appearance on the Todd Starnes Show, he addressed the subject of a possible leak.
Is there somebody on the inside that's broadcasting where Trump's going to be? These are questions. The other thing is Trump has been kind to the Secret Service in his response to this. But remember, these are the people who are supposed to protect him. They're surrounded. They're around him. They've got firearms. It would be hard for him to be critical of them at this moment, but I'm going to be critical of them. Nobody should be able to get this close to take that shot.
So Massie says there is a real concern about a mole at DHS.
95% of these people that work there are Democrats. When they get in their head that they are saving the democracy by perpetuating these leaks, then they have no moral dilemma. They'll do it. They're basically justifying anything against the president in the minds of these radical activists, and many of them are working in these departments.
I'm Chad Groening.
The House is expected to vote on a 6-month stopgap government funding bill today, which includes legislation requiring proof of citizenship to vote in federal elections. House Speaker Mike Johnson.
If you have a small percentage of the millions and billions of illegals who came over the border in the last 4 years under border czar Kamala Harris's policies, they can throw an election. They can throw the majority of the House. It could affect a presidential race. It's very, very serious stuff.
The Department of Justice is suing the owner and operator of the ship that destroyed the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore.
Justice Department officials say they have filed a federal civil suit in Maryland against Grace Ocean Private Limited and Synergy Maine Private Limited, the companies that owned and operated the Dolly container ship. The ship had left the port of Baltimore headed for Sri Lanka on March 26th when it lost power and struck the bridge, causing it to collapse and killing 6 people.
Funds the state may recover in the litigation will be used to repay federal money spent to reconstruct the bridge and highway.
That's Eric Barron, U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland. The suit seeks to recover $100 million in costs related to reopening access to the port and damages for reckless conduct. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
Thousands of Boeing workers in Washington state are still on strike. This after workers rejected a proposed contract that would have raised their wages by 25% over 4 years. Mark Harmsworth of the Washington Policy Center points out that union leadership was in favor of the contract.
At some point here, you get to a position where Boeing literally cannot afford to do the increase, and then you're into layoff territory. So it seems Boeing came to the table to negotiate. The union leadership came to the table to negotiate, and they came out with a deal which, on the surface, it looks okay. And yet the line workers rejected it. I'm a small business owner myself, and so I want to pay my employees as much as I can reasonably and give them a good environment to work in, which I know that's what Boeing's trying to do. But when an employee comes in and says, I want a 25% raise over the next 4 years, I look at the bottom line and I may come back and say, I can't afford that. So there comes a point where enough is too much.
Boeing has since put a freeze on hiring. More news online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app. I'm Rusty P.
Liberals are determined to fight any legislation that protects election integrity. That's why the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act has been added to a continuing resolution spending bill. The SAVE Act will make sure only American citizens can vote. States will have to remove non-citizens from their lists of voters. Please take time today to urge your representative to support the addition of the SAVE Act to any continuing resolution bill. Time is of the essence, so visit afa.net today.
Today's Issues continues on AFR with your host, Ed Vitagliano.
And welcome back, everybody. Ed Vitagliano sitting in for Tim Wildman this week. I am joined by Tony Vitagliano, Dr. Alex McFarland. Fred Jackson has gone to the house, his office, in other words, and Chris Woodward steps in to fill those shoes.
Thank you very much. 14 years in, and I'm still learning that you need to put on the right headset.
Yes, the technology's not your strong suit, or
let me tell you, those broadcasting classes are paying off, Mom.
Those broadcasting classes. All right. Did you study? You have a degree in journalism.
I do.
Correct?
I have a Bachelor of Arts in communication.
Yes. So it wasn't necessarily though in radio, though, right?
No, I studied. Thank you for asking. I studied television, radio, and print. So I took all kinds of things.
So you could do any of those.
I am learned.
You are learned. Well, no, you're a great asset here. So,
thank you.
That's one compliment for every 6 months.
Write that down.
So enjoy that. All right. Well, what's up? What kind of news did you want to bring to the attention of our listeners?
Yes. One of the things that I love about our news service is that we cover oftentimes legal challenges involving the little guy, people that you're not going to see on Fox, you're not going to see on Newsmax unless something huge and develops out of it, and they do want to give that some time. In our news today, we have a story airing about a lady named Tiana Pagan. Now, Tiana Pagan held a position at the City University of New York as a public service and fellowship coordinator, where she oversaw various fellowships, and she helped place students with those fellowships, and she would check in throughout the semester with the students to see how things were going, make sure they were comfortable there on campus with what they were doing and how they were connected. Well, Pagan's attorney, Christina Heuser, says Pagan had a conversion experience where she committed her life to Christ while at the City University of New York, and she later sought a religious accommodation to avoid placing students with organizations that promote things like LGBTQ causes. Don't take my word for it. Here now is a soundbite from attorney Christina Heuser talking about this situation. Clip 12.
So she sought a religious accommodation from her employer. And the employer denied the accommodation, but not only that, they terminated her. And they even said to the EEOC, because we had to file with the EEOC before we could go to court, that the basis for the termination was that she cited scripture when they had a meeting about her accommodation request. So basically, because her biblical belief is that homosexuality is a sin, they determined that she could no longer be employed by the university.
So just to sum this up again, an ex-employee of a public university is suing her former employer, claiming she was fired because she was a Christian. This is a federal case. It's going to be playing out for a long time. We'll probably have updates.
Now, to kind of flesh this out just a little bit here, she was not asked, when she applied for a religious accommodation, she was not demanding that the university not tell LGBTQ students where they could go to have to join groups on campus. She just said, there are other people who can do that. I don't want to because of my Christian belief, right?
Right. You are correct. It's very similar to the Jack Phillips or the Barronell Stutzmans of the world that say, hey, there's some people over here that would be happy to do it. I don't feel comfortable. I can't do that right now. It's against my faith. So she wasn't saying you can't be on campus and do these things. I just don't want to be the person the go-between.
All right, Alex, you've been around academia. You've been a part of academia at the college level. You go to college campuses all the time. This is almost a rhetorical question, but I wanted to have your perspective on this. Is this a common attitude on the part of public universities towards Christians whenever Christians want to actually live out their faith in an employment setting?
Oh, I believe it is very common. And while, I think this person will have a very strong case because, my goodness, in her employment contract, certainly it would not have been spelled out that quoting Scripture in explanation of one's religious convictions is a fireable offense. Isn't that ludicrous that in America, quoting Scripture would be part of the fodder the university would use to justify this person's termination? But guys, I've interviewed many, many college students for several of my books. I've interviewed faculty. And while, I think there are hundreds, maybe thousands of examples of really intimidation and Christians being silenced in the academic arena, and people just kind of keep their beliefs to themselves rather than risk being written up. The very word university means a plurality of ideas and opinions. American secular higher education really should be called a monoversity, because the one worldview that's allowed would be just this hyper-pluralistic, relativistic, woke environment. And when you talk about morals, beliefs, Christianity, my goodness, that will put a target on your back in a hurry. And I've heard this from literally hundreds of students and faculty all over America that I've interviewed.
Tony, it's not that these universities are opposed to absolute truth. They do have an absolute truth, and that absolute truth does not include Christianity. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, it doesn't even include a conservative view that may be devoid of a religious foundation. I'm thinking of pro-life students. Not all pro-life students or faculty have come to that position politically because of religion, or even specifically Christianity. Sometimes there are atheists who are pro-life. But that's not allowed either.
Right.
So this idea that they are for a pluralistic environment for everyone to just come to the table and let's all discuss it is nonsense. It is a uniformity. I think this is kind of what Alex is saying. It's a uniformity that is imposed in the name of diversity.
Right. Yeah, I think it's obvious that there are certain people who aren't allowed at the table. So they want to pitch the big table that everybody can come to, bring your ideas, bring your lifestyles, bring your thoughts, and we can all, get along. But there are certain people who are not allowed at the table. And the fact of the matter is that these universities have just become extensions and institutions of the left. And what the left requires now is full obedience. There can be no deviation. There can be no half commitment to the cause. You are
independent thought.
Independent thought, exactly. I was reading some more into this story, Chris, and I'm glad you brought it up because this is not something that I was very familiar with. But it said that Pagan, is that how you pronounce her last name? She says that Pagan, in the article I'm looking at, Pagan oversaw 9 other fellowship programs, and less than 10% of her job was devoted to the LGBT-centered program known as the Mixner Fellowship. Mm-hmm. So she thought, it says here, she thought the religious accommodation would be an easy fix and compromise, especially since she had collaborated with her supervisor on other projects where roles shifted smoothly. So this was not something that, as far as her job goes, this was not like she was in charge of LGBTQ, communication and assignments. This was like less than 10% of her job, but that wasn't good enough. The fact that she sought out a religious exemption to change her duties, 10% of her duties, wasn't good enough. And I'm curious, Chris, what other argument would someone present as the reason for requesting a religious exemption other than using the text from your religion?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is why do you feel this way? She throws out scripture, and then according to her attorney, she gets fired because she cites scripture
in answer to the question that the university asked.
From whence do you base your reasoning or things like that? And so it's very mind-boggling, but not surprising given that this is the umpteenth story that we have covered in the newsroom about somebody being persecuted or let go because of their stance on issues in the workplace.
Alex, it strikes me as I say humorous. It's disturbing, but it is kind of funny to me that universities that act like they are completely secular, or they say that they are completely secular, act like religions. And to me, this lady was fired for being a heretic. Okay, that's their approach to this. She was fired for being a heretic because, as Tony mentioned, there is only one way to think about it, and the professors and the people that they cite, the Foucaults and all of these individuals whose writings have come down to be the dogma of the universities, Marx and whoever else you want to throw in there, they fired her for being a heretic. Is that overstating?
No, that's true. When C.S. Lewis was on the cover of Time magazine back around, I'm thinking it was about 1943 to 47, but the headline said C.S. Lewis, his heresy, ? Orthodoxy. In other words, Orthodox Christian truth was so radical among the liberals of the mid-20th century, it was viewed as heresy. Guys, I wrote a book called Stand Strong in College. There's a seminar I do called What You'll Hear Your Freshman Year, Preparing for the Ways That College Will Challenge Your Faith. And I've done this seminar all over America for 20 years. But I wrote a book, the publisher, Tyndale, named it Stand Strong in College. But anyway, the real title was supposed to be What You'll Hear Your Freshman Year. But among the kids that I interviewed a student from the University of Arizona at Phoenix, and there is a student orientation that all freshmen have to go through. Now, this Christian young man said to me, part of the student orientation was to go down to this basically hardcore porn shop and write what your feelings were about it. Now, one might think student orientation is like where to get a parking pass, where to get a meal ticket. And so this young man said to me, he said, I didn't want to do it. And I went to my professor and I said, I'm just not comfortable. I don't want to go in a place like that. And the professor was describing you could do this paper, that paper. And then the professor said, why do you not want to go in this store and write about your feelings? And the young man said, well, because I'm a Christian. And he said the professor's countenance, he got like angry and failed him. And there was a long rigmarole. The student had to, for months, fight about, because if you want to go to University of Arizona at Phoenix, you have to go through orientation. But that's just some of the, I guess, programming, that the idea that you have morals, you have this, traditional values. Students, it is like bludgeoned out of them. Wow. And it takes a very courageous Christian young person to be willing to calmly but resolutely defend their morals and values in the very often hostile American secular university environment.
Alex, let me just ask, and I don't want to just stay here on this one topic, but let me just have this follow-up. Do you think that the situation you just described, and we've all known it's been going on, but is at least part of the explanation why so many young adults are slipping away from what you might call organized religion? We're talking about going to church and belonging to a church that has a creedal statement. And do you think that this is increasingly a significant part of the reason for it, or Or has it been this
absolutely.
way so long that it's just one of many?
Well, that PhD professor is an authority figure at the head of the room and speaking. Young people do care about truth, but look, for 50 years, hyper liberal Marxist hedonists have led our universities. There have been some exceptions, but my goodness, there was a survey back in 2016, and they estimated that more than 95% of college professors vote Democrat.
Yeah.
So, Ed, to your question, yes, absolutely, it's had an effect. Our universities, I'll say this and I'll throw back to Chris and you all, our universities are not teaching people to think. They're just programming nice, compliant secularists.
Oh. All right. Let's go ahead and move on unless you've got something else
I do
on this
want to
story.
point this out. What we just aired there and what we've discussed is airing today. I've been sitting on this for 2 days, and I reached out to CUNY, or City University of New York, to try to get them to comment. They did not.
No, they're not going to comment. What you'll get from them is we do not comment on
Pending
ongoing
litigation.
litigation. And I understand the legal reasons for that, but even if that wasn't going on, there is no in our country, a public university has no right doing this under the Constitution. They are going to lose at some level of the federal court system. They're going to lose, so that's why they don't want to make a comment on it.
All right. In other news, whether you're preparing to go to Wednesday night prayer meeting and Bible study, as I like to call it, or you're looking forward to Sunday morning service, we all need to be in prayer for our brothers and sisters in Christ all over the world, specifically those in China. Earlier this week, as reported on AFN.net, Chinese-American pastor David Lin was brought back to the U.S. after nearly 2 decades in a Chinese prison. We talked about that earlier this week. Bob Fu of China Aid, we talked to him to get his reaction to David Lin being back in the U.S., and Bob said, look, it's great. It's long overdue, but we need to be in prayer for the people over there, Americans and Chinese nationals that are in prison or facing prison for the same kind of thing, false charges, that David Lin faced. David Lin was accused of business fraud, basically, which Bob Fu has told us for a long time is something the communist Chinese government throws at pastors to get them in jail, because the Chinese Communist Party doesn't like what churches say and do. So I've got some sound here from Bob Fu telling us about the various Christians imprisoned or facing prison in China today, even after the release of David Lin. Clip 13.
We have a lot of pastors are either already sentenced or about to be tried in the court in the coming weeks for simply putting offering box for tithing and offering. They were charged with the same criminal charge like Pastor David. It's a business fraud. So now tithing and offering in the Communist Party's China is regarded as a criminal act.
Now, Bob Fu went on to urge people to press elected officials and candidates at all levels, federal, state, and even the mayors of cities that have, a sister city or a relationship with China, saying we should all speak up directly to the Chinese Communist Party leaders and say that if they continue this path of persecuting innocent Christians and other religious minorities, they should not expect the good, kind citizens, especially Christians, to let them off the hook.
Tony, this is I'm thankful for this story. By the way, Chris, before we move on to another story, please promote American Family News.
Yes.
It can be brief. A lot of our listeners know what American Family News is, but I want other people who don't know to understand what kind of service they can get. And it's very, very helpful.
Okay. American Family News is the news service of American Family Association. We are heard at the top of every hour on American Family Radio, and praise God, we have about 100 or so non-AFR stations that also air our news at the top of the hour on their stations. AFN.net is where you can find a lot of what you hear on the radio, wind up as print articles, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't even hear on the radio, so do check out AFN.net for these stories that we're discussing.
And so, folks, when you are wanting to say, boy, I wish I could, I didn't get that person's name, or I didn't get what city that was in, if you go to AFN or get these stories in your email box once a day, you have all that written out.
We do.
Find out who the person was, who's suing who, and that's the kind of information you can pass around at Sunday school or to family members. But Tony, what I was going to just get your take on is I'm thankful for this story because a lot of times we're locked into what's going on in this country. And we were just looking at listening to this story from the City University of New York, someone getting fired for their Christian faith. If we're not careful, we forget that there are people around the world who are not just getting fired. This pastor was thrown into prison for 20 years. And in some places around the world, Christians can't even own a Bible. We're talking about countries in the Middle East. They can't share their faith. So it is valuable for us, and this is one of the things I appreciate about American Family News is we do cover what's happening around the world as well. This is a critical part of being a part of the body of Christ, which exists outside the borders of our own country.
Yeah, it's a reminder to me to first of all, like you just said, that the church is bigger than the church in America, right? And it's just human nature for us to focus on where we live and the problems that we have here. But stories like this are just they are a stark reminder of what our brothers and sisters in Christ throughout the world are dealing with on a daily basis, and it's a kind of a conviction, to me at least, and hopefully to many other Christians here, for us to be more thankful and grateful that we do live here, and be grateful for the freedoms that we experience here, because I'm almost certain that our brothers and sisters in Christ in other parts of the world, in communist China and Iran and numerous other locations, would love to enjoy just a taste of the freedom that we have here. And it's an encouragement and a challenge to me, and I hope it's a challenge to other Christians here who are listening and who live in the United States, to continue to stand up for our rights here, because I have a feeling that if just based on what we've heard over this past hour and a half, of people getting fired for their Christian beliefs, of people calling for the imprisonment of people pushing false information or misinformation, it doesn't seem like we are very far away from something similar occurring here in the United States.
Good point. Alex, we have heard, you probably, I'm sure, have heard as well, we have heard from people around the world here at AFA and American Family Radio, American Family News, whatever, Christians in other country who are praying for the church in America and who are exhorting us, do not give up this fight, because if America falls, we're afraid of a dark age, whether it's under the heel of secularists and communists, or whether it's some religious persecution under Islam or whatever. And they are praying for America and exhorting the church here not to give up.
The church in South Korea sends missionaries to America. One of the places that's been very prominent has been Denver, Colorado, because Denver, Colorado is a very unevangelized region. But yes, Christians around the world, it's like Reagan said back in the 80s, that if freedom is lost here, there is no real other sanctuary. And for all of our failures and foibles, we still are a Judeo-Christian constitutional republic. And let me just say, as a pastor, I challenge my fellow clergy to preach the kinds of sermons that potentially could get you fired. Preach some sermons about boldness, courage, speaking truth, and standing for our freedoms, because if we lose it, none of us will ever live long enough to see it recovered.
Yeah, if it ever comes back at all, and it does seem, to your point, to the point Tony was making, it does seem sometimes that we don't really believe, we do here at AFA, but we don't really believe it can be lost. When our founding fathers all said, this is an experiment, and we are entrusting that experiment into the hands of the American people. it is something that can be lost and has been lost, which is why the United States is the longest successful constitutional republic in existence and
in world history.
In world history. Folks, that's all the time we have for today. More great programming directly ahead on American Family Radio. Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow.